thwarting Slav TV.
Based Poland just doesn't seem to be able to catch a break this year and has once again found itself being the target in the mainstream media and globalist crosshair. Last year, the leftist media labeled Poland's politicians as Islamophobic racists after they bravely refused the EU's ludicrous migrant quotas. The average Polish patriot was labeled a Nazi for participating in the Polish Independence March in November, and now a new bill in Poland has the country under fire for being anti-Semitic Holocaust deniers. On February 1st, Poland's Senate approved a highly controversial bill that bans any Holocaust accusations against Poles, as well as descriptions of Nazi death camps as Polish. Essentially, the law would ban accusations that some Poles were complicit in the Nazi crimes committed on Polish soil, including those in the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination camp, where some statistics claim that 1.1 million people died. Once this legislation is signed into law by Polish President Andrzej Duda, anyone convicted under the law could face fines or up to 3 years in jail. As you may have guessed, this bill invoked widespread criticism and triggering from the international community, which is evidently still using any opportunity it gets to slander and blame Poland for putting its own national interests first over all others. Members of the US State Department expressed fears that the bill would infringe upon free speech and that it would ultimately be used to target Holocaust survivors and historians while simultaneously creating severe repercussions for Poland's strategic interests and relationships. In Israel, the reaction to the bill was even more fierce, with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blaming Polish politicians for attempting to change history and flat out denying the Holocaust.
אין לנו שום סובלנות לסילוף האמת, לשכתוב ההיסטוריה או להכחשת השואה.
Many other Israeli politicians echoed these sentiments, and Israel's Remembrance Center cautioned that the bill could blur the historical truths regarding the assistance the Germans received from the Polish population during the Holocaust. Agnieszka Markiewicz, the director of the American Jewish Committee's Central Europe office, advised that the bill was too broad and wrongful in its use of the term Polish death camps, but also announced that Polish-Jewish relations were in a time of heightened crisis. She went on to say that Polish people don't bear the responsibility for the Holocaust, but like other nations, they do bear responsibility for the behavior and attitudes of some. Members of Poland's Jewish community also complained about increasing anti-Semitism in the Polish government's discourse this past week, claiming that while anti-Semitism wasn't a new phenomenon in Poland, that it certainly was exploding in the mainstream media. Despite being open to diplomatic dialogue with Israel, the Polish government didn't bow down to criticism as usual and stood by the bill this week while pursuing the Senate's approval. Poland's Deputy Minister Patryk Jaki later referred to Israel's reaction as proof of how necessary this bill is, advising that the legislation's main aim is to fight all forms of denial and distortion of the Holocaust, as well as belittling the responsibility of the actual perpetrators. Other Polish politicians also backed these sentiments, claiming that the term Polish death camps was simply a lie and that the goal of the legislation isn't to whitewash history, but rather to safeguard it and safeguard the truth about the Holocaust and prevent its distortion. The Polish government also argued that twisting the reality of Poland's history could make young Poles believe that their country was involved in such crimes, which is obviously a legitimate concern at a time when Europe is plagued by sentiments of white guilt. Despite widespread criticism of this bill and the very obvious smear efforts by Israel, what's most worrying in this situation is that modern-day revisionists are completely ignoring the countless heroic acts that the Polish people did for the Jews during World War II.
Nigdy nie zgodzę się na to, żebyśmy my jako naród, Polacy, jako naród, czy Polska jako państwo
6,706 Polish people have been awarded the title of the righteous among the nations by Israel, more than any other country, for their efforts in rescuing hundreds of thousands of Jews from death. This figure, however, does not account for the hundreds of thousands of Poles who helped Jews throughout the war. Irena Sendler, a brave Polish nurse who served in Armia Krajowa, helped to smuggle some 2,500 Jewish children out of the Warsaw Ghetto and provided them with false identity documents and shelter outside of the ghetto. There were several major heroic Polish individuals who helped save the Jews, such as Dr. Eugeniusz Lazowski, who alone saved 8,000 Jews by faking an epidemic of typhus in Rozwodow. On top of all this, there are dozens of other Polish heroic individuals who helped the Jews on a similar magnitude during World War II. Ironically, Jewish politicians who are quick to jail 90-year-old grandmas for denying the Holocaust in an effort to preserve what they believe is historical truth are suddenly outraged that Poland is trying to do the very same thing in an attempt to preserve the truthfulness of its own history. Sadly, none of this is surprising, considering that any forms of nationalism and patriotism coming out of Poland have been attacked by the mainstream media and the international political community. While the bill being passed in Poland may be considered controversial, it is definitely crucial in preserving historical truth, especially for a nation which did so much to help out the very same Jewish people who are now suddenly labeling Poland as a far right-wing Nazi country. While I'm obviously not denying that there wasn't a single Polish traitor who would have collaborated with the Germans out of a population of 35 million people, the actions of a few dozen or hundred unknown traitors do not in any form or magnitude oversee the hundreds of thousands of Jews that were saved by the Polish people. At a time when crazy leftist revisionists are doing everything in their power to rewrite the history of European nations in order to create the illusion of collective guilt, it's absolutely crucial that nations like Poland stand their ground in order to protect what is historically true. Just the thought of a white Christian European nation being united terrifies those at the top who will stop at nothing to make sure that all Western nations are infiltrated by the same instruments of white guilt that are causing the very collapse of Europe today.